Thank you so much for joining me on The Same Drugs. I love trigonometry. I think you guys are so smart, and I think you guys are great interviewers, and I really appreciate the podcast. There's not that many podcasts that I have the time to listen to, but yours is one that I try to keep up with. So I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Thanks, Megan. And we did a brilliant interview with you. Was it 2 years ago now? Was it like the first lockdown? And we had you on for a chat, and it did brilliantly well. And then ever since you've been on Rogan, you've done amazingly.
I'm doing my best with what I can, but yeah, I think that was a couple of years ago, and I enjoyed that. So yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate that.
No, it was a lot of fun.
I'd love to talk to you. I know, during your interviews and podcasts, sometimes you talk about your background, how you grew up, your family, things like that. But can you tell me a little bit more about that? Where did you grow up? Where did you come from?
Well, it's kind of complicated. So my mother is from Venezuela. She came to this country in the 70s, and she met my dad, and then she got a British passport, which was the thing she really wanted. That was what she came for. I mean, they're still together. My dad was from the north of England, from a very working class part of a town called Wigan, which is sort of in between Manchester and Liverpool. They met in London. And then I grew up in a quite sort of, I would say, lower middle, upper working class part of South London. But I spent my time between the UK and Venezuela. So going back to Venezuela once a year. And that was interesting because you've got the contrast between two completely different cultures. So you've got the culture in England, especially as it was at the time, which was very much, sort of very class orientated. But also as well, like, you don't talk about your emotions. You don't express anything that you're thinking or feeling. If you feel something, you fucking bury it. And then you drink in order to then cover the emotions again. And then going to Venezuela, where everybody's just like, fuck you. This is what I think. This is what I feel. Arguments, shouting, whatever else. So going from ultimate expression to like, no, we never talk about anything. And that was kind of a contrast. And then I went to a private school till I was 13, and then I went to state school. So I got to see lots of different parts of life. I was very, very fortunate in that. And as a result of that, that kind of colored my experiences a lot, because you get to see different cultures. And as a result of seeing different cultures, you see what's positive about certain cultures, what's not so good, and you can compare and contrast and cherry pick. But also as well, being from two different cultures means that I would say you never truly belong. There's always a sense of other about you, because even though, like, my dad is English, my dad was always at work. So it was my mother who raised me. So I've been raised with a lot of Latin American values, that when you start going out into like British society, you realize people don't always share. So for instance, with Latin America, it's a big thing. Family is very important. You support your family. You invest in family. In Britain, people are far more, particularly in London, they're far more orientated around job, career, making money. So it was a wonderful opportunity to see two completely different cultures. And I was very lucky for it, and I'm very grateful.
I mean, do you think that one culture is better than the other?
Well, at the moment it is, because Venezuela at the moment is fucked, Megan. So you could say that. I'd say it's different. Like, the work-life balance in Venezuela is much better, much healthier. It was at the time. The respect for family, the respect for old people. Like in England, once somebody is old, we're just like, fuck them, grandpa's on the scrap heap. Whereas, in Venezuela, they look after their old people. A lot of the times when abuelita or abuelo becomes ill, they come and live with the family. The family look after them. There is far more, how can I put this? There's far more unity there. There's far more respect. There's far more love for old people. So in that sense, it is positive. Culture is, you can say, what is better? Venezuelans, corruption is part of their culture. It just is. That's how it works. So, I think with everything, there are positives and negatives. Look, they're much sexier, much more fun people. If a British person invites you to a party, you're probably better off not going. If a Venezuelan invites you to a party, you're going to have a great time. It's not going to be a well-organized party, Megan, but you know, you're going to have a blast.
I mean, I know what you mean a little bit. Like, as I mentioned earlier, I've been living in Mexico for the past year. And, you know, I left Canada really because of the COVID restrictions, because I was concerned about what was happening in terms of the government trying to legislate around free speech. You know, what I saw as like a removal of our rights and freedoms. And I was really fearful about where that would go. But also, like, I want to have fun. Like, I want to have joy and enjoy my life, and not only be around people and have community and like kiss and hug and party and sing and dance, but like have fun. And I feel like that isn't really a value in Canada. Like, that may be similar to UK culture.
No. Yeah, exactly. That is so true. Like in UK culture, you know, it's a very sort of Protestant work ethic. You know, that's why we've got a great economy that works, because all we do is work. And then when we finish working, we're really angry and miserable. So we go and consume shit and buy shit and drink and spend our money doing that. Whereas in Venezuela, people go, well, why am I going to work? We've got the beach. And like you go to a party in Venezuela or a family gathering, and after about 10 minutes, people are screaming at each other. They're throwing epithets. Bastardo, tú no me respetas, ¿qué te pasa contigo? And then 10 minutes later, they're absolutely fine with each other and chatting again.
I love, because I'm sort of like that, despite being Canadian and having grown up in Vancouver and come from a pretty like uptight and fun family, to be honest. But, you know, like, I really feel very comfortable with conflict. So like I can have disagreements with people, arguments with people, kind of like heated. I'm not talking about toxic, abusive stuff. I'm talking about, I disagree, I'm straightforward, this is what I think, this is what I feel, and not really have any feelings about that, and just we go back to being friends. Or, you know, if it's with like my boyfriend or a family member, it's like, okay, anyway, moving on. But I find a lot of people really aren't like that. A lot of people feel really, really uncomfortable with conflict, with disagreement, with raised voice. Like, I'm a pretty loud person, so I don't get super upset about it. Like, the things that I think are normal and that don't super bug me, I feel like do make a lot of people uncomfortable, come from Western cultures, you could say, but, you know, Canada, you know, the US a bit, depending on where you're from, probably the UK.
Oh, I mean, the UK is ridiculous. In the UK, we tend to communicate with just, you know, we never say what we think or what we feel. We just don't. Everything is buttoned up. You can't say you think or you feel, because then you make yourself maybe open, and then you're weak, and then we don't do that. You know, we say, when we're really angry, we say things like thank you in a sarcastic manner. That's how we are. Like my mum, like the first 20 years here, she thought like people were being friendly to her. I'm like, no, mum, they fucking hate you. She's like, how do you know? I'm like, because they were sarcastic to you. And she's like, why do they not tell me how they feel? I'm like, mum, have you learned nothing from this country? We just don't do that. We don't do that. Like, Megan, you would know if an Englishman really fancies you, because he would never talk to you and ignore you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good tip. So, I mean, I wrote off, when I left Canada, I also had written off Canadian men. So I hadn't particularly written off Englishmen, but I mean, I'd sort of decided I was like, no more Canadian men. From now on, I'm going to date like men from other countries, you know, maybe an American man, maybe a man from Europe. So, you know, maybe that is like a helpful tip. Not
But you've
Canadian.
got such a sexy man in Justin Trudeau leading your nation.
I don't find him sexy.
He's a sexy black man. What's the matter with you?
Well, I'm a racist.
There you go. Do you not like a transracial man? What's the matter?
A bigot and a racist. I'm transphobic and racist. Thanks for calling me out. So, you know, 10 minutes into the interview and I'm already been revealed. Can't hide it, I suppose. I'm wondering, you have a particular experience with communism that you've talked about before that I find interesting, useful, especially within a current context of a lot of leftists in countries that have never dealt with communism before, sort of idealizing those ideologies, those, those countries, those politics. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. So in 1999, President Hugo Chavez was elected democratically a couple of years ago. Before that, I think it was in 97, 96. This is the internet, someone will correct me. He tried to orchestrate a military coup to overthrow the government. But in 99, he got elected. And the reason he got elected was because Venezuela was a very wealthy nation. It should be one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Largest oil reserves in the world, large amount of natural resources, beautiful country, should have cleaned up. But due to corruption and also due to racism, desperately unfair society, uh, unfortunately, there was a huge amount of poverty, real, desperate, awful poverty. And the Venezuelan people were sick of corrupt president after corrupt president after corrupt president, all coming from the upper social stratas of society, coming in and essentially robbing the place blind and then going to live in a country like Costa Rica. That's what they did. That was, the modus operandi, the business plan of every Venezuelan president. So Chavez came to power on the back of La Revolucion. What we're going to do is we are going to break from this type of politician, this type of presidency. We're going to see something different. What we're going to do is we're going to give the power back to the people. You know the slogans. We're also, going to transfer the wealth from rich to poor and create a fairer, more equal society of Venezuela. And we're going to do it on the back of the oil wealth. And actually, when they started out for the first couple of years, and by the way, all the people came out, your Jeremy Corbyns on the left, your Owen Joneses, all these people came out, our Sharko, was super positive about what was going on in Venezuela. In fact, even Bernie Sanders, it was held up around the world as this great socialist paradise. So anyway, a couple of years, it was actually going quite well. Things started to happen. New schools were being built, hospital facilities, etc., etc. But pretty soon things started to turn dark because what happened is that communism started to be unrolled in Venezuela. People were, inverted commas, seizing the means of production. So there was an oil company which ran all of the oil fields in Venezuela called PDVSA. Chavez took over that oil company, fired all the oil executives, put his own people in charge, and then lo and behold, what happened? Well, production fell. The problem was the economy was 97.2, something like that, dependent on oil. The country essentially went bankrupt. And then what happened as well is what you have, what is called La Revolucion, which is a revolution. It's a pun in Spanish, but basically saying it's stealing a huge amount of money. And there was huge amounts of corruption in Venezuela. And what was happening was Chavez was essentially plundering the reserves of the gold reserves and giving it both to himself and his cronies. So one of my former relatives was the president of the Banco of Venezuela. And Chavez said to him, I want you to give the oil reserves to me. My relative refused, pointed out and said, look, that doesn't belong to you, Hugo. That belongs to Venezuela. He was then placed under house arrest. So that was my relative. He was an elderly man at the time, married to my cousin. He was placed under house arrest. Hugo Chavez had a talk show called Hola Presidente, which he would then go out, and this is the insane thing, he would then go on and deliver a direct address to the nation 5-6 times a week and go on for hours on end. Basically, it was the world's first live stream, but he would take over all of the TV channels. So you'd go channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, and it would only be Chavez doing all of this, right?
Man, Americans thought Trump was bad, eh?
Yeah, exactly. You've got nothing on Hugo, right? And he would just be there. And most of the time, he would be talking, as we say in Britain, absolute bollocks. So he'd be there, be starting out and go, this is a direct address to the nation. He'd talk about something relevant for about 20 minutes. And about 45 minutes in, he'd start talking about his tortoise. That's not a joke. He literally started talking about his tortoise, right? So,
was he insane? Like, I didn't know that. Was he mentally ill, actually?
No, he was just, what he was sort of classic he was very much in similar, well, completely different politically, but similar in a sort of modus operandi way to Donald Trump. For instance, he was actually quite funny, Chavez. He said that George Bush was as dangerous as a monkey with a razor blade, for example. You know,
Yeah.
and this was back in the early noughties where nobody had seen anything like this. You know, this is a man who would come out and say outrageous things about, other politicians, etc.
Yeah.
So what happened was he was doing one of these Hola Presidentes. He said about he talked about my relatives and said, my relative, and said the words, fuera Diego Luis. My relative was then put under house arrest, and he was put under house arrest for months on end until he agreed to sign over the gold reserves. So what you have with every communist society or every communist government is incredible corruption, because nobody ever holds them. No, they're never being held accountable for their actions. They can do exactly as they want, exactly as they please. So even people who get involved in the movement or in the party for noble reasons eventually become corrupted. And so that is what happened. And you saw Venezuela round about from 2003, so around about 2005, every year on, it just went down a little bit more, down a little bit more, down a little bit. There was, this might strike a chord with something that you may have seen or experienced, particularly coming from North America. The police said they didn't want to prosecute criminals because that was a symbol of right-wing oppression.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, we have that here. Well,
And
in North America.
Yeah, in North America, like Mexico, not so much. Yeah,
No.
if it happens, it happens. And so what you essentially saw is you saw real problems in society in Venezuela, and then you saw these hard left parties, organizations, figures coming in saying that they can solve these very complex problems which are entrenched in society and will take years to sort out, but applying sort of a magic formula to it, saying communism is what is needed. They come in, the country is bankrupted, it's just done to serve themselves, and it's a Trojan horse organization. And you see this repeated right the way through. So, for instance, when the BLM riots happened in America, and they were marching through the streets saying abolish capitalism, that's when my antenna went off and went, yeah, these aren't civil rights protesters. I've seen this trick before. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And I just saw that and I go, I know what these people are. And then I saw Patrice Khan's colors doing the Black Power fist salute with Eduardo Maduro, who is the current dictator of Venezuela, and I looked at it and I'm like, I know what this is. And I came out and I said it, and I got condemned for being racist by people in the comedy industry and all the usual epithets that people say. But I've seen it before. I know what the trick is. Once you've seen the trick, you don't fall for it a second time.
Yeah, I mean, it frustrates me now because I see it, but I didn't see it before because I always was a leftist and pretty like left of left. Like when I was younger, I identified as a Marxist. I went through a phase where I was interested in anarchism, and then I sort of settled into socialism and identifying as a socialist. And what the left does is they kind of just blame capitalism for everything. So it's like, oh, if we just get rid of capitalism, then all of these problems would be magically solved. And that's super oversimplistic and not true. And it's really frustrating to me because I have a lot of experience with the left as a leftist and doing kind of lefty journalism and things like that, leftist writing. I've written for a lot of or in the past anyway, no longer leftist websites and things like that. But also when you're engaging in feminism, which I have for many, many years now, they kind of do the same thing, except they add patriarchy. So they're like, just smash the patriarchy, abolish capitalism, ta-da! And I started to just, as somebody who was saying things like this, although I like to think that I was less simplistic in my approach. I don't think I went around saying smash patriarchy all the time, but I did say the word patriarchy and capitalism a lot, and started to think, what does this actually mean? Like, I'm saying these things, but what does this mean? And what would it mean to abolish capitalism? What would it mean to smash patriarchy? Like, do we have a plan? Where are we going from here? Like, what's the new system? How do we know that's going to be better? I mean, is there any legitimacy to the idea, which I bought into, and which, most people who are communists or socialists or Marxists or whatever they want to call themselves, on the left, is there any legitimacy to the idea that if we had socialism, there would be more equality and there would be less poverty and the working class would be better off? Because of course that was what I want. Like, I wasn't a bad person. I thought I was a good person. Like, I wanted things to be better, and that's why I advocated for these systems.
Look, and I think it's very important to say this. Just because someone advocates for these things, they may be wrong, but just because you're wrong, that doesn't make you a bad person. Just because somebody disagrees with me and thinks that socialism is the correct way to go, I wouldn't stop being friends with them. My girlfriend is a socialist. She is very, very left-wing. We disagree on practically everything politically, apart from the fact that Biden's a prick and needs to go. But that's it. But we disagree on everything. So no, not at all. There are aspects of socialism that I fundamentally agree with. Socialized healthcare, essential. I think what happens in America with private healthcare, the fact that the vast majority of we were talking on my show to Jimmy Dore, and and he was saying that he went bankrupt because he developed a very serious health condition, which wasn't covered by the insurance company, so he went bankrupt. And he was saying that happens to so many people in America. That's in a country as rich as that. That's an abomination. It's a disgrace, right? Number one. So number two, strong public health system, but also schools, etc., etc. So there is a lot to be said for taking some ideas from socialism and placing it in a capitalist model. The problem comes when you see people using the phrase abolish capitalism and they bandy it about. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them because people can be wrong. We're wrong. It's like when Whoopi Goldberg said that ridiculous thing about the Holocaust and whatever else, and people jumped down her throat saying cancel her. She's wrong, but I don't judge people for that. But I would say to people this, and this is a very important question: have you ever seen capitalism abolished? Because you're advocating for it. Because I'm telling you what, I have. And it ain't pretty. And I'll explain to you in one simple story what it's like when you see capitalism abolished. And for all those people who go, real socialism hasn't been tried, real communism, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to remind you again that all the firebrands of the left came out and supported Chavez. So this was a socialist paradise. This was el paraíso del socialismo. My cousin lives in a very nice part, very middle-class part of Caracas called Altamira, right? Very lovely middle-class part of Caracas. In a house which was very nice. He went from living in that house then to living in that house now. The main difference is there's blackouts for electrical blackouts for 3 to 4 to 5 hours at a time. He can no longer drink the water from the tap. It is completely undrinkable. He now drinks water from the tank in the roof above his house. That's how he drinks water. That's what socialism is. And it's bad when people climb on the roof of his house to steal the water from the tank.
I mean, yeah, so obviously, I was just going to say, it obviously isn't helping the lower classes because, those are the people who would be trying to steal water. I mean, you don't have access to clean water. That's almost the worst of the worst. Like, having access to clean water, food, shelter are kind of the basic things.
Yeah, of course they are. So these people banding about these slogans who have grown up in the West I say to people, and then people go, "Hey, you've got privilege." I'm like, "Look, we've all got different forms of privilege. Number one, right? Okay. Number two, I say to them, "You've got Western privilege." You
Yeah.
go, "What do you mean?" I go, "You don't know what it's like to see society collapse. You don't know what it's like to see society unravel before your eyes. You have no idea what it's like to flee for your life from a country where things have completely gone to pot. You don't know what it's like when a government comes into power and goes, you know what, you've said this, you're going to get put in prison." My cousin is a journalist. He had to flee Venezuela for his life because Chavez's goons were targeting him because he was critical of the government. In Venezuela, they have a thing, a secret called the secret police, called El Sabin. And what they do is, if you are critical of the government, if you are making a nuisance of yourself, if you are criticizing them overtly, they will turn up at your flat in the early hours of the morning. They in ski masks. They will take you away and they will put you in a prison called La Tumba, which is what it sounds. And they will throw you in there, and you may come out or you may not, but you will be there for months. That is what happens to people who disagree with them. There is a very, very well known in Venezuela comedian who had to leave called Ivan Aristagueta. He used to have an improv group. They weren't allowed to do jokes about the government. They were doing improv in a bar in Caracas, and they started to be successful, and people started to come down, really enjoy it, because they were one of the first improv groups in Caracas. They did a few jokes about the government. The bar owner, quite rightly, went up to them and went, "Show's off. They're done. Because if you do that, they're going to come after you. They're going to come after me. They're going to come after my family, and you're going to destroy my business."
I mean, it's so interesting because that situation is what people in Canada are advocating for in many ways. Not all people, but Americans too. You know, I don't know if you can hear it. Can you hear the
Yeah, I
hammering up
can.
there? They had stopped that whole time, and then as soon as I started talking, they're like, "I'm just
Yeah.
gonna bang on something else
Yeah.
again."
A woman is talking. We must shut her up, Manuel.
Exactly. Misogyny, eh?
Yeah.
Institutionalized misogyny in my home.
I mean, that is pretty much Latin America.
Yeah, there are a few problems here, but just a couple. But you know, like, I don't know if they realize that they're doing it, but I know people will think I'm crazy if I say this. But again, like, part of the reason that I left Canada is because I was like, I'm gonna end up in jail. Like, I say things that are critical of government policy, and these bills that the Liberal government, Justin Trudeau's government, that they're trying to push through are bills to, you know, deal with hate speech online. But of course, hate speech is just disagreeing with government policies. If you know, when it comes down to it, it would be like disagreeing with gender identity ideology, for example, like referring to males who identify as trans women as he, which are things that I do and I don't do to be antagonistic, but I do because I think that this is an ideology that's harmful to women and children in particular. But I think it's harmful in general just to, you know, lie and force people to lie, or, you know, compel them to refer to men as she when they're men, obviously. But, you know, like, I don't want to live in a country where it's criminal to disagree with ideology, and people frame it as hate and hate speech and dangerous, and therefore it's okay to criminalize because hate's bad. And they don't see the manipulation that's happening, and they seem to, you know, not be aware that this can happen to them. Like, Canadians, I think, believe that they're so safe. I mean, they are privileged. It's a good country to live in. You know, healthcare in Canada is good. I really appreciate that. Like, we have decent education. It's beautiful. You know, but I think that because of that privilege and because of that experience, I think that they're safe from dictatorships or from, you know, persecution, from things going bad. And that means that they've started to support policies that I think are quite dangerous.
Look, it's partly it's not their fault. They've never experienced these type of societies. They don't understand how lucky they are. And as a result, they demand this, because here's the thing. To me, this is safetyism. This is what this is. In the West, we want to feel safe. We want to feel safe and we want to feel protected. How do we feel safe? We feel safe because we don't want to be made to feel uncomfortable. How are we made to feel uncomfortable? We're put in a situation where we don't feel in control, right? So you see it all the time with people going to a comedy club getting upset because somebody says something they dislike. They feel it because, they have an argument with someone. You see it all the time in university campuses. This is a safe space. What does that actually mean? It means that that everybody who I'm surrounded by won't disagree with me. And that's how they control people. That's how you control people. So people who actually are disagreeing with you, people who actually confront you, people who have opinions that differ to yours, they say to you, no, you're making people feel unsafe. We're here to keep people safe. Therefore, we can't have this type of speech. Therefore, we can't have these type of views. You're making people feel unsafe. You're not making people feel unsafe. What you're doing is challenging people, and they don't want it. And the problem is that we're going further and further down the path. So at the start of it, I'll give you an example. We had Brendan O'Neill, the former editor of Spiked, on the show, free speech absolutist. He came on the show and he said there's a problem with free speech. And this was in 2018. I was like, really, Brendan? He was like, yes. And I said, give me an example. And he gave me the example of a comedian who wasn't allowed to do a Holocaust-denying song, right? And I said to him, Brendan, I'm going to be honest with you, mate. I'm struggling to give a fuck about this, right? But he made the point to me, went, yes, I know what you're saying, but if you're not prepared to defend free speech for the views that you find despicable, eventually they're going to come for you. And this is what people don't understand in Canada and wherever else. Like, people may disagree with you, with your views on the trans issue, but they don't understand that eventually it's going to move to something else. Once they've kicked you out, once you're no longer acceptable in the Overton window, it's then going to be something else. For instance, I know this comedian, and he's very woke, and he's got all the right opinions, and he's doing really well. And, he had a little bit of a set to with me on Twitter and whatever else. I saw him at a gig, and we started talking, and he was talking to me about vaccines, and he whispered to me, basically, he looked around and said, I haven't taken the vaccine because somebody I know has had a seizure from it. They had a really bad reaction. I don't want to take it. I also know other people have had bad reactions. Do you think he's going to tell his woke mates about that? No, because he's now an anti-vaxxer, and now he's beyond the pale, even though he's got quite reasonable reservations for not taking the vaccine. But he's now an anti-vaxxer, and now he's going to be kicked out from the tribe if he admits to his position.
Yeah, I agree with you that that's what people seem not to understand about free speech, is that they're just as vulnerable as anyone else. And right now, perhaps they're in a position where they can say, I'm right and they're wrong. This is good, that's bad, you're hateful, and I don't like hate. So you should be canceled, you should be silenced, you should be fired, perhaps you should be jailed. And they don't see that things are changing all the time in terms of what's acceptable and what's unacceptable in discourse. And when you do defend free speech, I only became like a big defender of free speech in the past few years, and I feel bad about that. But the reason why is exactly what you said earlier and exactly what we've been discussing, which is that in Canada, you kind of take it for granted. So I've defended the speech of people who are saying things that I don't necessarily agree with, or maybe that are uncouth. And I would for sure defend the speech of people who even said, like racist things or things that I would consider hateful, because that's how free speech works. And for a lot of leftists and feminists, they'll draw the line and they'll say, no, like I support free speech, but I don't support hate. And I'm like, no. Like that's not free speech. I'm sorry. And you can deal with speech. Like it sucks when somebody says something that hurts you or offends you, But you're going to be okay unless they're threatening your life, which in these cases, mostly that's not what we're talking about.
And that's what it comes down to, Megan. Deep down, these people don't believe in free speech. They believe in censorship. They believe in censoring the wrong views because it comes back to this safetyism aspect. They want to keep people safe. That's what it's all about. I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he's somebody of that particular bent. He said to me, Francis, I'm all for free speech, but I don't believe in free speech during a pandemic. It's too dangerous. I'm like, really?
Dangerous, man. That's super dangerous. Like, well, if it's an emergency, then we cancel rights. It's like,
yeah, exactly. But that's what we've done. That's what we've done in this country. We've cancelled rights. People are like, right to protest? Why do you need that? Boom, let's get rid of that. The right to congregate? Boom, let's get rid of that. You know, now we've got misinformation, which we use to keep people safe. What happened to challenging scientific orthodoxy? What happened to scientists disagreeing? Because a lot of the information we're given at the start of this pandemic, where we are now, has then been proven to be incorrect. That's fine. That's science. What happened to discussion? And again, you then see the Biden government coming out, misinformation. We want to keep people safe. No, you don't. You want to control people.
Yeah, I mean, and what happened to questioning mainstream media narratives, and what happened to questioning, corporations and big tech and big pharma? That's all gone out the window, and now we're supposed to trust. And it's like, gaslighting is a term that's overused, but it's almost like gaslighting because it's like, trust the science. Like, we don't want misinformation. And it's like, but your government lied to you. The media lied to you. Like, why should I trust big tech and big pharma, whose motive is profit, obviously, at the expense of people and the good of society? And, it's like, trust the science. Like, it's like being in a cult, or it's like watching other people be in a cult.
Yeah. And I feel desperately sorry for people. I really do. I went to the doctor the other day, and I don't know the name for it, but where you walk in the door and there's this little sort of compartment before you get to the next door, right? And it's a little sort of airless space of about 2 meters by 2 meters when you go from one door to the next. And I went through the door, and the second door, it was locked, and I was trying, and I couldn't find a way to open it. And then this woman came in, and she was working at the doctor's practice. And then she started trying to get in, and she couldn't, and she was wearing a mask, and she got more and more distressed. And I said to her, look, I can see your distress. I get it. It's with the whole COVID thing. I'll step out and I'll wait outside and you can do it. And she went, thank you so much. Just thank you. And she was wearing a mask. And you just feel like this is what the government have done. They've injected fear into our lives where we feel we're unsafe all the time. And the only time we can ever be safe is if we put on masks and we do these ridiculous protocols and we talk to people through plastic screens, even though none of these fucking things work. I mean, a couple of masks reduce it slightly, but the vast majority of cloth masks don't even work.
No, those masks don't work, and the way that people use them don't work, and the way that they're being told to use them doesn't make any sense. Like, put your mask on between bites on the plane, so take it off to eat and drink, and then quickly put it back on. And it's like, this is not doing anything. This makes zero sense. And it's just, I feel like it's created so much anxiety and fear, and then, judgment and hatred because, people are screaming at each other to put their masks on and mask up. And people who probably already had some anxiety to begin with, it's just totally gone through the roof. And that's the responsibility of the fear-mongering coming from the media and the government.
Yeah, and you just see people and you just think your brain is broken. It's just broken. Like you see the French government saying to people that that you can't go on a ski lift unless you've been triple jabbed, and even if you do use a ski lift, you've got to wear a mask. You've got to wear a mask on a fucking ski lift.
Just in case you spit, I don't know, at the face of the person sitting behind you and it happens to land inside their mouth.
Yeah, exactly. And she's a 97-year-old grandmother with comorbidities who's going snowboarding. And then she gets it, and then she dies from COVID. And all of a sudden, it's because you didn't wear your fucking mask when you're on top of the Alps.
Oh,
I
it's
just
yeah. It's like everybody's brains. Like I keep saying that over and over because I feel like I'm being driven crazy and I'm like, did everybody lose their minds? Like did everybody or did everyone get consent to lobotomies? Like what is happening? You're not thinking this through.
Yeah, we're not thinking this through. And I just want to clarify, I had COVID in December. I had it pretty rough, actually. I was really quite ill with it. And I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, it's just a cold or whatever. It's a really nasty bug. And for a lot of people who get it, they're going to be really unwell with it. And for a small minority of very unfortunate people who've got comorbidities or whatever else, they're going to have an even more awful time of it, and some of them are going to die. So I'm not discounting that in the slightest. But what I am getting really worried by is the unscientific aspect and approach and methods of dealing with this illness by governments, by fucking governments. Like Italian government saying you must wear a mask outside at all times.
Yeah.
Just
While
think
you're
this is
running
nuts.
alone outside,
Yeah.
and people are, doing all sorts of crazy, stupid things like wearing masks when they're alone inside their cars. This thing of like making people exercise in masks is crazy. Obviously, the making little kids wear masks in schools is crazy, as if kids are going to be wearing their masks properly. You know what I mean? And kids aren't at risk anyway, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I know I was a former teacher. I know what kids will do. They'll take off their mask. They'll hit another one round their head. The one will start crying. He hit me round the head. If I got COVID, I don't want to die. And that's not that kid's fault because they've had Project Fear pumped into them for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
I really despair. I really despair. Like if you had told me this is where we would be in the West, I would have lied. I would have said that you were lying. I would have said that you were lying. If you had told me about lockdowns and the way we collectively lost our minds, I would have said that you were lying. But seeing the way that the public have been manipulated by government, we're having an investigation now. I can't remember. So I think something like the British Board of Psychiatrists, I might have got this wrong about the organization. 52 really senior psychologists have said what the government did in our country was fear-mongering, disproportionate, and unethical in the way it injected fear into its citizens.
Mm-hmm.
It's awful.
Mm-hmm.
It's awful. And look, sorry, carry on.
No, go on.
No, and it's awful, and you just think to yourself, what are the long-term implications of this? So, for instance, in the UK, I can't remember the exact number. It's anything from 20,000 to 100,000 kids have gone missing. They're off the school roll. Off the school roll. Nobody knows where they are. Nobody knows where they are. So
Crazy.
there's that. Okay, what impact is that going to have on these poor kids? What's it going to have on their education? What impact is it going to have on their life chances? You look at there's a well-known statistic in education in the UK. A kid who goes into secondary school behind their peers will never catch up. That's a fact. It's incredibly unlikely that they're ever going to catch up. And we've done that to entire cohorts of children. They're going into secondary school. They are moving up the years without the basic fundamentals in education. And the government has given something like £50 per child in order for them to catch up. People don't talk about this. The fact what we're doing to our kids is criminal. It's absolutely criminal.
Well, not only that, but forcing kids to do school online and forcing kids online, forcing everybody online. Everybody was already online way too much. And what the pandemic did was to make everybody just literally be online all the time. Which, if I were a conspiracy theorist, the amount of times I say, if I were a conspiracy theorist nowadays, is very amusing to me. This is a great way to track and control people because that's what social media does. Like I talk to people who still believe, oh, social media is just for fun. It's no big deal. Like it's just a tool for me. It's like, it's not for you. Why would these corporations offer you a free tool for no reason at all? It's for profit. It's to track you. It's to collect data and profit.
Mm,
And
of
now
course.
you're online all the time. All of your info, I mean, mine too. Like I do this
Yeah.
too. I'm not judging people for doing this, but I also, I recognize what's going on and I'm cautious about what I participate in. Like I'm not joining the fucking metaverse. That's
Yeah.
creepy. And people
I
act
mean,
like it's just another game.
his face is creepy enough. You remember that advert where he was just there looking like some kind of weird waxwork robot,
Yeah.
and he was just
Like,
pointing
did
out
you
the
die
metaverse.
and you were replaced with a wax mannequin robot?
Exactly. And then you just look at me and go, you know what, Mark? Maybe you, because you creepy weirdo, want to live in the metaverse. I don't want to fucking live there. I've got no interest in living in a metaverse, right?
No, I
And
want real life and I want real people and I want touch. And that, that so it baffled me and really upset me during the pandemic because I got super depressed, I got anxiety.
mm,
It was really a horrible time for me and nothing bad happened to me. Nothing
mm,
happened to my income because I work independently, so I didn't lose my job. I had an apartment, I had access to everything that I needed, and still I felt miserable and felt like tortured because I
mm,
couldn't be around people and touch people. And I mean, obviously I still had friends over here and there, but
mm.
that's not the same thing. That's not the life I want, where I have like a couple of people over to my apartment to party once a week. Like that's not joy. That's sad. Um, and a lot of people were saying, oh, like I like it. I like staying home all the time. Like I like working online. Like I don't need to go out. Like I don't need to go to the bar. Like I don't need to go to like concerts or like sports events or whatever. Like I can just do everything at home. It's fine. And it's like I was like, wow, like I have super different values, I guess, than
Mm.
a lot of people. I've still not really been able to figure out what that's about, although I do think it's fear-based. I think it's some version of like, I just want to be as comfortable as possible. And if I'm in my house, on my couch, I'm really comfortable. I don't have to deal with people. I don't have to deal with social anxiety. I don't have to deal with interacting people that I don't like, or maybe people that I disagree with.
Mm.
I don't have to deal with like, weather, sounds, smells, life. And yeah, and I got a lot of pushback from a lot of people who kept telling me that this was fine and, life happens at home too, which of course it does. And there's people who are like, I'm a really social person,
Mm.
but, okay, you want that life, then I guess you can have that life, but don't make me have that life.
Exactly. And this is the thing, and it goes back to the safetyism aspect of it, where people in this country, and look, I don't blame them because before the first lockdown came in, we were all terrified. No one knew what this virus was. No one knew, how virulent it was, how deadly it was, blah, blah, blah. But that's what it is. It's this safetyism. I want to be kept safe. I need to be kept safe. How do we be kept safe? I want to be locked down. I want everyone to be locked down. I don't want the virus to spread. I want everything locked down and I want to be sat at home because that's where I'm safe. And you go, well, that's great. But eventually, you know what? You're going to have to go back into the real world someday. You can't stay in your house all day. This is what Australia have found out with their zero COVID policy. Eventually, you're going to have to come back to the real world. And unpleasant as it is. And you know what? We're going to have you're going to have spikes in infection because it's an airborne virus. And you know what? You're going to catch a fucking airborne virus because it's in the air and there's nothing you can do about it because you can't see it. And we people have just been indulged. It's just people have been indulged and people saying, oh, why can't I just, sit at home all day? Because that's not living. It's not being alive. The phrase I hate is, yeah, we met on Zoom. You didn't meet on fucking Zoom. This isn't real. Meeting someone is meeting someone in real life.
And yeah, and it's not, Zoom is not a replacement for anything. And I think that people should have learned that. Like, I remember at the beginning when we were kind of playing along and we're like, let's have like Zoom drinks. We'll have a Zoom cocktail hour. And I was like, okay, sure. I want to talk to my friends. Like, so I think I tried it like one time and I was like, this is so depressing and awful. I'm never doing it again. I'm not
It's like
participating.
alcohol-free beer. What's the point?
Yeah, like I would rather just be alone than like that
Yeah,
makes me feel worse. I don't want to
yeah.
look at screens. And again, people sort of were acting like it was normal and fine and just as fun. And the same, like people who were still like far, far into the, the restrictions, the pandemic, whatever. I don't even like calling it a pandemic, but fine. Um, who were still like, oh, we're having our wedding online, or, we're having a birthday parties for kids online. Like their kids would have a birthday party and they'd keep them locked in the house and make everybody drive by in cars and like wave. And I was like, oh God, this is a nightmare. Like, why are you pretending this is fun? This isn't fun. And then I was like, maybe these people have never had fun before and they don't realize. And for them, this is fun. And maybe they just don't like fun or know what that really is. I really am. I'm still having a hard time getting my head around the whole thing.
I think what happened with that entire time, I think we all went mad. And I don't use the term mad lightly. I think we all went insane. If you look at the George Floyd demonstrations, that was nuts. That was absolutely nuts.
Especially considering what actually happened there, which no one seems to care about. And it's not difficult to find out what really happened. At this point, it has been reported on. And we know that that wasn't a race issue and that there was a relationship between George Floyd and the cops. And people are still using that as though it's an example of this epidemic of racist police violence in the US, and then using that as an excuse to make arguments like defund the police, abolish the police, and to call America a white supremacist nation, and to defend things like rioting and violence and the destruction of businesses in various cities across the states.
Yeah, I remember like when it happened in the UK and people were out marching and they were just like, defund the police. I'm like, they don't carry guns, you fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Up.
Canada too. I mean, I see like in Vancouver, they're having like a BLM march in Vancouver, and I was like, what are you like? The demographics in Canada, but in Vancouver in particular, are completely different than the demographics in the US, like as far as race goes. Like there's a very small minority of Black people. It's mostly white people, and then we have a high population of South Asian people, and then Indigenous, and then Black is somewhere down there. But we don't have an epidemic of racist police shootings. That's just not a thing that really happens. Like maybe there's a one-off here and there, but like it's not, there's no gun culture in Canada like there is in the US. People don't carry guns around.
Exactly. And, and you just, but even then, I can't blame people because you know why? You lock someone in their house for 3 months. We're tribal animals. You deprive them of their friends, their family. You deprive them of their ability to go and work, to congregate, to socialize, to meet, to have sex, to do all these things that are so important to us that make life bearable and worthwhile. And you lock them in their house for months on end. And you basically, and then the only way they get to connect is by mainlining social media into their eyeballs, which we know is basically human cancer at this point. What did you expect to happen? Of course they went fucking mental. Of course they went absolutely nuts. And it wasn't about George Floyd, right? It wasn't about what happened, awful that it was, and he didn't deserve that to happen to him. I'm not saying that at all. But the reason people got so angry about it is because it was a powder keg. If it wasn't going to be George Floyd, it was going to be something else. There was a conservative advisor called Dominic Cummings, and he basically lied and he broke lockdown rules and he drove with his family to go on holiday to Barnard Castle. There was a mob outside his house and they looked like they were about to lynch him. And this happened 1 week before George Floyd. So people were then saying like about Cummings, and it got pretty nasty. And I was actually watching this going, if this guy's not careful, they're going to come for him. Why is that? Because you drove people insane. People lost their livelihoods. They lost their jobs. People were trapped in, people, particularly women, trapped in abusive relationships. They had nowhere to escape to. They had nowhere to go. And you just lock them down for months on end. Of course they're going to go fucking nuts. What human being won't?
Yeah. And I remember reading about like it was really dangerous for kids who were living in abusive households or households where they were being sexually abused or molested, because in the past, school was somewhere where you could go to escape and then have access to an adult figure that maybe, hopefully, would figure out what's going on, or maybe hopefully the kid would say something, and then they're trapped at home and they
Yeah,
have no other resources or access, to support at all. Same thing with, domestic abuse, domestic violence. The stats went up like quite a bit during the pandemic because of that being kept in the home.
of course. And we had somebody on from we interviewed them today. Somebody on to talk Matt and Saab Cousins to talk about gambling and the gambling industry. And he was quoting these horrifying statistics. Problem gambling spiked over the pandemic because you've just had access to a computer and to be online for 24 hours a day. If you've got the propensity to be a problem gambler, you're already anxious, you're already cut off, which for an addict is the worst thing to be. What are you going to do? You're going to go and gamble. We just went nuts. You know how nuts we went? I think someone said, like, I think it was Pornhub who said, like, in honor of George Floyd, they're only going to show black porn. You're like, what the fuck is going on with the world? What's
That's
going on?
awful. Yeah.
You just
And
go,
I'm,
"What?
yeah,
This is
like,
nuts."
and I think, I mean, I actually don't know, but I'm sure people did start using a lot more porn during the pandemic. Like,
They
there's,
did.
are
Yeah.
there stats that show that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there are.
I mean, I think that it dehumanized people in a number of ways, like in a lot of different ways. And I think that it forced people to be dependent on like online sex and dating. Like, I mean, it forced people to kind of put their relationships online. But I think whereas before, I mean, a lot of people were using dating apps, for example, before, and
Mm,
accessing porn online before. But I think that really solidified it for people, because now it seems to me that everybody, even my age, but particularly the younger generations, just think that's how you date. That's the only way that you meet
mm,
people. And if you want to meet people, you go online. And I think it's such an unhealthy way to date and meet people, because it's totally superficial, it's objectifying. I think it's bad for your brain. I think, again, the fact that these apps really just exist to collect data on people, and they actually don't want people to find healthy, loving relationships, because they want to keep people on the apps.
mm.
And so they operate like, a slot machine does, which is swipe, 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 ding, ding,
Yeah.
ding, ding, ding. And it's rewiring your brain. And nobody nobody's willing to engage with that, hardly at all. Like, I feel like I'm the only one who's ever like, no, I'll never use a dating app. These things are awful. Like, I remember when I was single, my friends were like, just go on a dating app, just go on a dating app, especially
Mm,
during COVID. Like, I was single during COVID, and that was like
mm,
a nightmare. Um, and I was like, I'll just not meet someone, because I would go on a dating app for like 20 minutes and be like, this is horrible and depressing and I hate
mm,
it. I don't want to spend any more time on a screen than I already do, but I don't want to go on a date with a stranger. I don't want to message with strangers. I don't want to judge people based on their appearances and like two words. I don't want to be judged in that way. I just don't want to engage. Like, I've always, met people in
mm.
real life through friends of friends of friends. And it's been totally normalized, and nobody seems to understand why that's bad. And it makes me think, I think people think that I'm like old fashioned or prudish or something like that. And I'm like, I don't know, it seems obvious to me.
Yeah, it does. It does. And what the pandemic did is that it normalized spending excessive amount of times on a screen, on your phone. And what it also did as well, I think, is it acted as a catalyst that society was always going to go this way anyway. We were all going to mold more and more into the metaverse, but it just acted as a catalyst and sped everything up. And you just worry, like we're in the UK, we're finally coming out of this. We're coming out of this. All coronavirus restrictions have been lifted, and we're slowly shifting our way back to normality. But the reality is that the world of 2019 is gone. It's been changed forever. And what we've got now, I mean, I don't even know. I really don't. Because you're looking at Germany and Austria and like doing lockdowns for the unvaccinated, and in Australia, and you just think this is fucking nuts. This is nuts.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you followed what's going on in Canada, but we are revolted, and it was all thanks to the truckers. So it's called the Freedom Convoy, but
Mm,
last week tens of thousands of truckers and their supporters came out across Canada. All these big semis drove across Canada to Ottawa to protest all
mm,
the all the mandates, the vaccine mandates, the mask
mm,
mandates, the restrictions, the lockdowns. And it's been really amazing because I totally wrote Canada off, and I was
mm,
like, these people are done. Like, they're so passive. Like, nobody has any balls anymore. People are just going to
mm,
go along and go along and go along. And as long as you go along, then they're going to keep doing it to you. If you don't push back, this is never going to stop. And turns out there's, tens of thousands of people across Canada who are not down and aren't going to take it anymore. But what's been interesting is that the response from the progressives, the left, I mean, these binaries I'm critical of. I know that it's not helpful to be like right, left, and most people
mm,
don't fit neatly into those categories, including myself. But I think these people would identify themselves as left or as
mm,
progressive. So that's why I continue to use those terms. They were hysterical.
mm,
And they started accusing the truckers and their supporters of being white nationalists and white supremacists and of being dangerous extremists. And they called them all anti-vaxxers, despite the fact that the arguments they were making were not against vaccines. It was against the vaccine mandates, and they were very clear about that. They acted as though they were terrorists and they were going to be violent. And the whole thing, like, I watched so much footage online,
mm,
and I talked to the organizer yesterday. I've talked to people who've gone out to join these rallies in various provinces. And it's all like super peaceful and joyful and loving. And people are
mm,
dancing and like handing out food and like high-fiving each other. Like, it's just nothing like that. And the left won't let go of that narrative. And it's weird to me because to me, I was like, oh, the working class are rising up.
mm,
Like, these are not the elitists. These are
mm,
not the elitists living in urban centers who are overeducated and upper class and like working from home.
mm,
These are people who are like out doing working class jobs. I mean, truckers make good money,
mm.
so it's sort of a bit more complicated to label them working class. But I was like, why is like the left hating on the working class now? Like, they act like they can't think for themselves. Like, they're too stupid to understand what they're doing. They're just a bunch of conspiracy theorists and rednecks and science deniers, and they're being horrible. Like, if anybody's being hateful, it's these people, because I
Mm,
see it all online, because a lot of those people are my friends that I know from Vancouver. And I'm like, you don't even like, first of all, you're repeating lies that you haven't even looked
mm.
into. You're just repeating what your friends are saying online. Like, you're not paying attention to what's really going on. But the things that they say are actually very extreme and actually very hateful, never mind untrue. And I think it's very condescending and very elitist.
It absolutely is, but it also shows that the left no longer represents ordinary working class people and that they've abandoned them. And I saw it more and more with some of my friends who would claim to be left, but they were in favour of harder, faster lockdowns and more restrictions, which the Labour Party in this country was. And you just think to yourself, have you got no idea of what this is doing to ordinary people? How you're essentially driving a lot of small and medium-sized businesses to the wall with your actions, and all you're doing is then allowing the Jeff Bezos of the world to come and then occupy that vacuum and make even more money. The rich made a killing from the pandemic, and it was brought about by these lockdowns. But they don't care. They don't care because it's safetyism. Remember one of my friends who's he's a teacher in a very exclusive private schools, championing to me the the efficacy of lockdown and why it's so good and blah, 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 blah. And I'm, yeah, but dude, you're getting paid to sit at home. You know, you're not losing your business. You're not losing your livelihood. You're not losing your job. You're not
Yeah.
a woman trapped in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I noticed also, is that, they completely lost touch of and
Mm,
care for what was happening to working class people and small
mm,
business owners. And yeah, there's just this disdain coming from the left. And it's so sad, because the reason that I was a part of the left for so long was because I wanted to support, I came from a working class family. I wanted to support working class people and the
mm.
labor movement. um, and somehow that's just gone out the window. I did want to talk to you. It's been an hour, so I'm not sure how much more time you have.
I've got about another 10, 15 minutes if you want to carry on.
Sure. I mean, there was just part of the reason that I was reminded to contact you. I mean, I've wanted to interview for some time, was because I'm switching trains a little bit here, but
Mm.
uh, you guys, you did an interview with I don't know what if she would call herself, a sex worker or a porn star or whatever. Her name
Oh, yeah.
was Eva
Ever
Lovia.
Lovia. Yeah.
Lovia. And I was on an online panel with her sort of recently
Mm,
around free speech and pornography. And one of the big frustrations that I've had since I've become more of a free speech advocate is that people who I agree with on things like free speech and censorship and individual
mm,
rights and liberties have a pretty lazy perspective when it comes to porn. Like, I don't
mm,
see pornography as speech. I'm also, like, I'm not necessarily advocating for censorship, but I do think that pornography is harmful and bad. And just because we aren't advocating for censorship doesn't mean we need to pretend that anything goes and this is all fine and good and this is just like a neutral, a job like any other.
mm.
It's just a fantasy, whatever. And I really appreciated your pushback and challenges to her and your questions, because a lot of what she was saying, like, I remember one of the things that she said was, I think you brought up like abuse in the porn industry. And she
Mm.
was like, well, like, harassment happens in any industry. And that's something that people who advocate to normalize porn and prostitution say a lot. And these, like, self-identified sex workers who are in the public eye, also saying, like, this is all fine and good. I guess, I mean, I wonder what your analysis and perspective is on porn, because I mean, unfortunately, I find it to be different than a lot of men's.
Okay, so I think, so going to that interview, and I really enjoyed that interview. Her real name is Candice. I really enjoyed speaking with Candice. I found it a very interesting interview. But this idea that sex work is work, then my pushback on that argument would be, well, that's cool. Do you want your daughter to be a sex worker? And the answer is no. No, it's not. It's a hard and fast no. Chris Rock did this amazing bit of stand up on it. He said, "Your only job as as a father is to keep your daughter off the pole."
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, which is a brilliant, brilliant bit of comedy. The reality is that you don't want that to happen to your daughter. And I find the normalization of sex work incredibly worrying. We had Julie Bindel on, who is she would say herself, an old school left wing feminist in the classic mold. And we were talking about this. And the fact that, Durham University was advising its students on how to get into sex work and how to do it safely, I found absolutely horrific. This is 18, 19, 20-year-old girls. The reality is, right, when it comes to something like this, if you take part in this industry, you are then going to have your opportunities, curtailed, your reputation damaged, because That will then be uploaded to the internet, and people will be able to look at that content forever. And she said herself in that interview, you sign the form, it's for in perpetuity, and then they can do with that content whatever they want. And I feel really sorry for these women, because a lot of them, when they go into this industry, they're not in a good place in their life. They don't come from good backgrounds. You know, they go in very young, 18, 19, 20. They spend 2 or 3 years and they move on. And then you think, right, maybe I had a tough time in my early 20s, which a lot of people did, which I can certainly sympathize with. And they want to go on, they want to go back to college, or they want to do something, but it's always going to be there. And that is a stain that, unfortunately, in our society will never leave you. And as a result of that, like I said, you're going to have your reputation tarnished, and you're going to be denied professional opportunities. Like when we talked to Candice, she said that, and Candice is a very intelligent woman, and she said that, and she's, married now, and she wanted to open up a franchise, and the company wouldn't let her because of her pornographic background, because of her background in porn. And it's just really sad. And I think people don't realize that the decision to go into this particular industry will be with you for the rest of your life. It's not a mistake that, you can party too hard, you can make mistakes, you can do, you can go down the wrong route in life for a couple of years, but you can reverse out and come back and be on the straight and narrow, as it were. Porn won't allow you to do that. And for that reason, and that reason alone, I find it really worrying that institutions like the University of Durham, which is a very prestigious institution in the United Kingdom, it's one of the best universities in the UK, would advocate for it. I really enjoyed that interview with Eva. I disagreed with it fundamentally. Like, the story about coercing that girl into a group scene. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
I found it just heartbreaking. And look, she's got her point of view, and I respect that, but it's not one that I share.
Yeah, I mean, and those stories are all too common. And I mean, I suppose I just feel that arguments against pornography are often misrepresented, because I've been arguing against pornography for at least a decade. And I also, I've talked to all sorts of people about this, and I'm interested in hearing different perspectives. Honestly, I'm interested in talking to men who use porn. I'm interested in talking to women in porn who've had good experiences, who've had bad experiences. At the end of the day, what I come back to is that I just don't think it's good for people, and I don't think it's good for society. I think it's been so, normalized that young women and girls now think nothing of putting porny images or actual pornography on social media, going on OnlyFans or using Instagram for those purposes. And like you say, not thinking about the long-term repercussions, or even things like, sharing nudes on Snapchat and dating apps and all these things. It's just the normal thing. Like, it's normal to objectify yourself, and girls really think this was already a thing before, but I think it's gotten worse, that's their job on the internet, is to look sexy and to get male attention, to get likes, to be like, you're so hot, you're so hot. And there's no understanding or conversation around how that impacts your mental health, because it's really bad for your mental health.
Yeah, it's terrible for your mental health. And look, we're going to need some studies done on the effect of pornography and children, because here's the thing. This is what parents don't understand. And I remember saying, we used to do, sex education with kids at the age of 10 and 11, because, as you would know yourself, of course, some women start menstruating at the age of 10 and 11. And when girls grow up from certain backgrounds, they don't know about this. So my ex-girlfriend was never taught about the fact that she was going to start having her periods. And she had her first period when she was 10 years old. And then she was terrified because she thought she was going to die. She thought she was going to die when she had her first period. Now, so I was a big proponent of sex education, but explaining to kids what was going to happen, puberty, etc., etc. so that they understood what was going to happen to their bodies and how their bodies were going to change, right? And I remember one parent going to me, "Well, I don't want my child to be doing that. They shouldn't learn about this." And I said to him, "Okay, fine, but they've got an iPhone." He was like, "So?" I put a parental lock on it. I'm like, "Sir, with all due respect, your kid can get around that parental lock in 30 seconds better than you or I can. And number two, that is giving him access to every porn site on the World Wide Web. If you think your child isn't accessing the hardest of hardcore pornography on that phone, I would be very, very surprised."
When you can't avoid it, I mean, what I've said before is that, like, in the past, boys had to see. Nobody starts using pornography as an adult man. You start using it when
Mm,
you're a kid or a
mm,
teenager. But boys would like find a porn magazine, like
mm,
their father's porn magazine, or they'd somehow sneak one from somewhere and go hide and look at
mm,
it. And so you did kind of have to seek it out a little bit.
mm,
And now it's there, and you would have to, like, I don't even think you could avoid it. Like, I don't want to look
mm.
at porn, but I see it all the time. It's all over the
Yeah.
internet. It's everywhere.
Mm.
It's all over social media. It's just totally unavoidable. Um, I wonder if you think there's a negative impact on men in terms of this
Yeah.
amplified porn use, and the fact that, again, it's all over Instagram, for example, and men are just using it as a daily part of their lives and maybe not even thinking about it, maybe not thinking, "Oh, I'm going to use some porn," but something shows up on their feed and they're like, "Oh, look, porn. Okay, I guess now I'm looking at porn."
I think the problem is that it desensitizes men, and and the reality is that the human brain, and particularly the male brain, isn't designed to look at those types of different images. And it's the constant change of woman that you're looking at. So eventually your brain becomes desensitized. Like, I was listening to, I think, a podcast with John Ronson that he did about pornography called The Butterfly Effect. I don't
Yeah,
Which
I
is
listened
brilliant.
to it. It was good.
Yeah.
It was yeah. Yeah.
And he was talking about male performers being unable to ejaculate, or do a cum shot, and so they were watching pornography whilst being with a real life woman in front of them. And that kind of sums the whole thing up. Even the people making this kind of content need the pornography in order to perform. And it just shows, as a society, really where we're going wrong. And because the worry is that young people will look at this and think, you know what, this is what sex is. And sex within a relationship is nothing like pornography. The vast, vast, vast majority of women do not like to be treated how a woman is treated in a pornographic film. And the problem is that, then people start to think that's what sex is. So I remember my old flatmate, who was, she came from the generation younger than me. So she was 10 years younger than me. And we were talking about this, and she said that her friends are despairing because every time they go and have sex with a new partner, it's like they're auditioning for a porn film. And it's like that, and they find that that's what the man is expecting, because the man is thinking that's what porn, that's what sex is, when it's not. It's not like that at all. And we all feel that we have to do these acts, we have to look a particular way or whatever else in order to have a happy sex life. And it's just not true. And it's really sad.
Yeah, or that, like this idea, and Eva talked about this in the interview, the idea that it's like, "Oh, well, these women in porn, they just really love sex and they're really open and comfortable with their sexuality." And I'm like, I love sex, and the last thing I want somebody to do is pay me for it. The last thing that I want is for it to be filmed and put out in public. Like, I like sex, so I don't want that to happen. I don't
Mm,
want to be treated like women in pornography. I don't
mm,
want sex to be commodified because I like sex. Like, I don't want to feel like I'm being looked at and watched, and therefore I have to be performing during sex, because that takes away from the enjoyment.
mm,
But that argument and that idea, I think, is normal now and is accepted by a lot of people.
mm. And look, here's the thing, I can't vouch for what Eva truly thinks and believes. She might be incredibly atypical and find and enjoy that. I don't know, but that is what she said, and I took her at face value. Like I said, it's not something that I would want for myself. It's not something that I would want for the people that I love in my life, and it's something that I certainly wouldn't want for my daughter. Yeah, the problem comes is that we live in a free society, and if people want to do that for whatever reason, then ultimately they should be allowed to do it. But like I said, it's not something that I would want for anyone that I know.
I'll let you go. I'm going to ask you one last question. I know that, people have been, I mean, especially the kinds of people who are from what was once called like the intellectual dark web. I don't think we really use that term so much anymore, but maybe heterodox people. They talk a lot about like a crisis in masculinity and like men need to be men again often, which I think is interesting. And, they criticize the idea of toxic masculinity, and say, masculinity is a really good thing or can be a really good thing. What do you think about that idea, and what do you think makes a good man today? What do you think that young men should be aspiring towards and to be as men in this society?
I think in order to be, in inverted commas, to be a good man, it took me a long time to figure this out, is to take responsibility for your actions. Stop blaming other people. Take responsibility. You are where you are through, the choices that you have made, the paths that you have gone down, and owning it. And I guarantee to every single man who listens to this, like, if you start taking more ownership for your actions, which I have done, as painful as it is, it's not pleasant, it's not nice, it's not comfortable to go, actually, the reason I'm here is because of X, Y, and Z, and that was down to me. But I guarantee you, if you start doing this, you'll lead happier, better, more successful lives. Stop blaming other people. Start taking ownership. Start taking responsibilities. It's all very Jordan Peterson, but it's true. Your life will get better as a result, Yeah, I'm someone who's always struggled with my weight. And the reality is, yes, we live in a society where junk food is surrounding you all the time and you're incentivized through fats and sugars to eat these particular things and they feel good while you're doing it. But ultimately, my body is my responsibility. So I've got to accept that I have a weakness in that particular aspect of my character, to limit myself to not buy sweets and whatever else when I go to the supermarket, to try and to exercise, when I can, around, and I run my own business, we'll co-run it with two other people, and that's very demanding and stressful. But it's also my responsibility to take care of myself mentally and physically. So I would say being a good man is not the traditional things that people say. It's taking responsibility, it's working hard, and it's standing up for what you believe in, because you'll never regret standing up for what you believe in, despite the short-term consequences.
I agree. And I mean, that's applicable to women too, I think, in many ways. But thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad that we could find a time to talk. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that we can have another conversation sometime again in the future.
Yeah, Megan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. I've loved it.
Okay, take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.